testing out a new microphone. I feel like I'm always trying to perfect my at-home office, and just like in any engineering or science application, it's usually a lot of failure, and then eventually you get some sort of success. There's no correlation between these three columns. It's just I sorted them from highest to lowest. So one thing you can just kind of figure out wherever you were here, kind of see your ranking, I guess, on everything. Yeah, one thing you'll notice, I might have been a little bit more picky on the lab than I have been in the past. That's just because you're getting better at them. So I have to look harder to find things that need improvement. I I only gave 100 in all out of all 95 people on that one. So one thing we're gonna learn about today actually is one of the more important jobs of an engineer or a scientist is to, obviously it's to fix things, right? Obviously you're trying to optimize processes and get, faster, stronger, smarter, cheaper, all of those things. But I was at a conference over the weekend, and this guy was talking about how, and I completely agree with him, the number one job of engineers and scientists is to identify problems, right? You can't fix a problem that you don't know is there. And that's what he was saying he's looking for when he hires an engineering technologist. Is we need people that can raise flags, because you can always solve the problem with your whole team afterwards. But everybody needs to be on the lookout for possible disasters, essentially, or chinks in the armor, for another analogy. But I've spent a lot of time looking at Excel spreadsheets. But before I became a teacher, now I do it even more than I used to in industry. But I found that even when I was in industry, my main job was to find things that could be improved upon every time that you opened up the document. So I'm being very nitpicky. If I took off a mark, like if you got 29 out of 30, it's probably because it's just a stupid little thing that I just am pointing out. But it catches the eye, right? If I can spend 5 minutes on something and find some sort of inconsistency, that's something that can be improved upon, and just take it as an opportunity to just get better at what you're doing. Don't take it as anything bad. I mean, it's just an opportunity to get 100% next time. So basically here you have your lab 3 grades, so you can calculate the average and your standard deviations and figure out your percentile, all that stuff. There used to be 110 people in this class, but I guess people have dropped the course over the last couple of weeks. Thinning out the herd, if you will. A few of you got 100% on your midterm, especially in this group. I was quite, I always knew this was a strong group, but geez, I think about 5 or 6 of you got 100% on the midterm in this section. So I'm gonna have to make the next quiz harder. And then this column over here is your overall grade. So up until now. So everything. So if the course were to end today, that would be your final grade. But this is only out of 40 marks. So so if you're sitting there being like, oh man, I did really bad on the midterm, or I didn't really do very well in the quiz, don't worry. because we've only done 40 out of 100 possible marks at this point. So there's still lots to go. I posted something over the weekend here that is a nice little introduction to confidence intervals. And it's the story of the NASA Challenger explosion. You're probably too young to remember this, unless you're my age, like unless you're around 40, you won't remember what happened in 1986. I was 6 years old at the time, and it was insane. You're watching I watched a NASA space shuttle on live TV just explode. It was the Challenger explosion of 1986, and it shocked the world. And it's considered one of the greatest engineering fails in the history of, at least North America. And you can read about, so he died, basically the chief engineer, and he's the guy that tried to blow the whistle, a guy named Allan McDonald. He was working for the contractor that makes the basically the booster rockets on those old space shuttles, and they had a special gasket, or what they called the O-ring, and it's just basically a washer or something that seals the rocket fuel from the explosion. So it's very important. And they had only tested it, and they were 99% sure that it would work as long as it's above 11 degrees Fahrenheit. But in Florida on that day and the night before, it had been extremely cold, like something like it was in the negative temperatures Fahrenheit, which is freezing for Florida. And so it was unseasonably cold. And before takeoff, they wanted this guy to sign off on it because he was the chief engineer of the contractor that made these O-rings. And he refused to. He refused because it was too cold, and it was below what we're going to learn today, a 99% confidence interval. So everything up to the midterm, we were looking at, how to find things like means and standard deviations, percentiles, probabilities. But what's really interesting and what's really applied in the field is something called inferential statistics, which is what we're going to learn now until the end of the course, where we're going to say, yeah, that's great. We know what the average temperature is that an O-ring fails, right? But what can you say about that O-ring that you haven't tested, right? In other words, as you can imagine, let's say you grab a sample of, you test randomly, let's take a number like 50 O-rings before you put them onto your space shuttle, but you can't use these on the rocket ship, because when you test something, the testing procedure, right, you randomly test these things, but the testing procedure tends to destroy them, right? Because you're testing for failure, right? I'm trying to figure out at what temperature this O-ring is going to fail, right? What temperature is it no longer going to form a good seal and going to explode? So you're testing for a temperature, the low temperature. And so you can't use those because you've destroyed them. You want a brand new O-ring. But so again, descriptive statistics, we're mostly, you'll notice, obsessed with samples. But now we're going to move into what can we actually talk about in terms of all of the O-rings. If I just pick a random O-ring, I want to know about what are the parameters of all the O-rings. And in order to do that, we have to generate what's called a confidence interval. And so today, I'm actually going to kind of jump ahead and talk about means first because of the example that I want to use, which is the temperature failure on a spaceship. Again, just because it's topical, because he passed away this weekend. So in memory of him, I'd like to start with how so again, he stood up and said, I'm not going to sign off on the spaceship. And what they had to do is the CEO and the politicians and the management people went around his authorization and launched that rocket anyways. And then look what happened. It blew up. All these people died. The company, was destroyed. People lost their jobs. And just because, they didn't listen to the chief engineer. And we're going to learn those types of calculations that those people do. And so, even if your manager, decides to go ahead with it, he identified the problem, right? He said, there's a problem. I'm not signing off on it. And hopefully that's what you can do someday. And hopefully you're not part of a disaster. But, that's the reason those engineers wear that iron ring right around their pinky. That's to symbolize their dedication and their ethical duty to make sure that the machines that you make are not going to hurt people, right? It's almost like a doctor's oath, right? Not to cause harm. And this is basically the same thing. Okay, so you're testing for failure. So let's say you're testing these O-rings and you have a sample size of 50, and you find out that the average temperature that these things fail at is, well, let's say 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, we'll use this because this is relevant to that article if you read it. Right, so you test 50 O-rings, you have this, and your standard deviation, you need this as well, okay? Because we've been doing standard deviations. Let's say you test all 50 of them, and your standard deviation from your testing is, I don't know, 1.5. Right? This makes sense. You test 50, just like the data we did in the first 3 labs, right? You can find your standard deviation. Now, the real question is if I take an O-ring that has not been tested, in other words, from the population, right? Let's assume that the population here is just infinite, right? You're just making O-rings, it doesn't really matter. Let's just say you've made 10,000 of these things. If I just grab a random O-ring, what's going to be the average failure rate? And essentially, a confidence interval just means what's the error and what is the error on the error. So there's 2 parts to this. We need to figure out what is the error on the mean, error on the sample mean. And then we're also going to want to know the error on the error. And that sounds confusing, but it makes sense when you think about it in a minute. Well, we're going to approximate and say that this is good enough, again, because of the size of the sample, that we can pretty much assume this is the population standard deviation as well. Now, again, that's a condition of this. If this was a smaller sample size, you have to use a t-score. And that's what we're going to learn tomorrow, is that if your sample size is less than 30, you need to use a t-score. But for now, again, because I'm sure they've tested 50 O-rings many, many times, we can assume that there's a standard normal distribution. And so what we need to know is that I want to be, and if I'm building something where it might explode, I want to be 99% sure that the average that I give you, the average fail, is between what 2 values? There's going to be what's called a lower bound and an upper bound of a confidence interval. And essentially our final answer is going to look something like this. The average temperature of failure of an O-ring is going to be whatever the sample average was, plus or minus some sort of error. And then I have to determine what is the error on the error, and that's what's called the confidence interval value itself. You'll also see this it's most commonly in newspapers or popular culture with polls, right? They'll say that 55% of the population is going to vote for I don't know, Mayor Nenshi in the next civic election, plus or minus 5 percentage points, 9 times out of 10. You'll see like 19 times out of 20. That's the confidence interval when they give you an error on the error, right? That's the problem that will be seen on Friday with the proportions. But again, with engineering, the other popular ones that we'll see, the popular ones are 95, 98, and 99. So let's say we want to be 99% sure. How do we go about doing this? How do I put error bars on my value? Well, the equation that you'll see on your formula sheet that I kind of pointed out there earlier is the error will be a z-score corresponding to your confidence interval. So your confidence interval is going to determine your z-score. And then the other stuff we already know. We know the standard deviation and we know the sample size. And so the first trick when you're doing these problems is determine if it's a z-score or a t-score. And then you look up the corresponding z-score. So we're going to need a z-score that corresponds. So if it's a 99% confidence interval, I need a z-score. So the total amount of uncertainty, that's what alpha symbolizes in these problems. So the total uncertainty in a 99% confidence interval is 1%. And because it's a confidence interval, it's divided in half, right? Half of the uncertainty is below and half the uncertainty is above. So I need a z-score that's going to give me a probability of 0.05 on the low end. And 0.05 on the high end, right? Both of these areas would correspond to 0.05. So again, I'm looking for the middle 99%. 99% of the time, I'm going to be between what two values? Okay, so first step in all of these is whatever I just did here, the background, right? What do you know? What's the question asking? Right, the question is asking, it would say, it'd be up here, right? You have 50 O-rings. We're testing for failure, at which that fails. In testing, it was the average of 12, a standard deviation of 1.5, and what is the 99%? That's how you'll see it on the test. What is the 99% confidence interval? And then you're going to make this drawing, right, to show me that you know that a confidence interval has what's called two tails. This is called a two-tail uncertainty, right? Because it could be low or it could be high in a bad way. And that after that, so yeah, that's kind of step one, right? Is kind of setting this all up. And then your step two is find the z-score. And so you would look on your chart and find 0.005. That z-score, that magical z-score of a 99% is 2.575. The other magical one is the 98%, right? I was mentioning there's so the 98% you'll see a lot as well. But again, on the practice questions, they're going to ask you anything. They could ask you 80%, they could ask you 82%, they could ask you 97%, I've seen before. So, you can't take this for granted, but these ones are just the ones that are used in industry so much that they come up more often than not. So I'll let you find the 98 one. But I'm just going to go ahead and use that 2.75, right? Because it's plus or minus, right? It's going to be symmetrical. And the error is plus or minus. That now I have everything I need to do, right? I didn't have to use a calculator until now, right? You can find your error. So these are the error bars that belong on this problem. Now, if you think about, think about that day of the launch, right? Or, before when they're assembling the O-rings, you're going to want to make sure that you've recently tested a certain batch of the ones that is going to go onto the spaceship, right? You want to be testing continuously to make sure nothing is wrong, especially with the batch or the lot number that you're actually going to put on the spaceship. Now, the question is, how many do you have to test? Right? Well, we're going to get there on, well, we'll probably start talking about that tomorrow when you can determine, because as we're going to find out, you're going to want to make this as small as possible because testing takes forever and it's expensive. So I'm getting an error of 0.546. Let's stop there. Maybe one more digit. So what does this all mean? And this is where it's important for you to write this down so that I am clear that you know what you're talking about. So the lower confidence bound, right? The lower boundary, they call it. You hear boundary a lot in statistics, but the lower boundary of the confidence interval is going to be that average that we got minus the error, and the upper boundary plus the error. Right? Which one's going to be important when you launch a space shuttle when it's cold outside is the lower boundary. But if you want to be sure, you would use the upper boundary. Right? You think, this is the fail safe. When you're talking about an O-ring that's going to explode, you're going to want to give the upper boundary because that's the safe one to say that you're 95% sure it's going to be above there. Or 99% sure or whatever, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. Let's just finish this off. So we got 12 degrees minus 0.5462, 12 degrees plus 0.5462. So my lower boundary, and this is where significant digits is very important. Right? You'll know I'm going to be talking more and more about that. I think I flagged a few labs on that just to make you aware of it. But the level of precision we're going to give our answer to, make sure it's just one extra digit than the original data, right? You have to go back to your original data here. Right, this is significant, two significant digits, two digits, two digits. All the data we used was two digits at the least precision. And so we're going to go ahead and say, let's give the answer to 3. Remember in I think chapter 1 or chapter 3, it talks about that, right? Always one extra digit. And here it really comes into play when you're reporting a confidence interval. You say, all right, it's going to be 11.4538 or something like that. But again, let's round it to just one extra digit. Okay, let's round it. Let's be careful about that. And that's where the answer comes in. These are going to be 5-point questions on your next quiz. I want to see these, there needs to be 5 steps to get some marks there. And you're going to say, here's how we make a conclusion with this stuff. The actual fail temperature. So go back and restate what we did. Right? We're trying to figure out the actual fail temperature of the O-ring. Okay, so put that sentence in there. The final exam, it's on Pearson, and it is cumulative, but it's not multiple choice. These questions will not be multiple choice questions. They're long answer. That's another difference in the second half of the course. We kind of move more towards, you know, can you explain your answers and show your work a little bit more? So the actual fail temperature of the O-rings is between 11.5 degrees and 12.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you put your confidence. That's 99% confidence. If I was going to bet you that I can hit this thing, I'd say, well, I'm 80% confident. But if I want to gamble everything on it, right? If you and I were at a dart, you know, a dart tournament, and you said, Steve, I'll bet you 95%, you know, I'll bet you 95% of all your money. I would want to make sure the dartboard's bigger. I would feel more confident with a bigger error margin. 95% of the time, I'm going to hit the bigger dartboard. 80% of the time, I'll hit this. And so you can just see it in the numbers as well. Like if I wanted to say, what is the 80% confidence interval, let's say, of the same problem of the O-rings? This error is going to be smaller because the Z-score is smaller, right? Everything else would stay the same except for your Z-score. And you would say, well, what's 80%? Right, I have to go look this up. So if it's 80, that means that the alpha is 0.2. So alpha over 2, 0.1. So that's the value I look up on the chart. I almost made a mistake. I was looking over here, but no, you want to be down here, right? 0.1, something like this. So 1 point, what would that be? That would be 1.285. 1.285. And so when you throw that in there, obviously, as you can, you know, imagine, that's going to give me a smaller value because it's in the numerator. And then again, as you can see, you could play around with the sample size if you're trying to optimize the process. So if I only want to be 80% confident in my result, I can give, again, a more restricted or smaller error margin. Right? If I only need to be 80% sure, I can give you a tighter window.